Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first webinar in our two-part webinar series, Understanding Security, Privacy, and the Regulatory Landscape for Genomics in Research and Clinical Settings. I'd like to now introduce your host for today, Dr. Lauren Buell, Vice President of Security, Quality, and Compliance at DNA Nexus. We're excited to have Dr. Buell on board as he brings over 20 years of industry experience and a unique combination of scientific, commercial, regulatory, quality, and IT disciplines to identify and manage security, quality, and compliance issues.
Thank you, Carolyn. So welcome to the first webinar from DNA Nexus. I've been with the company for about 6 months, and I was hired to be an independent view on quality, security, and compliance. And what I'd like to do today in this webinar is to share some of the experiences that we've had with the DNA Nexus platform, with our customers, and where they've gone in both the research and clinical space. And as a reminder, well, so as we go to the agenda, we'll focus primarily on regulations. So we're going to be focusing on clinical trials, manufacturing in a regulated space, and clinical diagnostics. So that's the focal point, but we're going to discuss elements such as security and the evolving threat horizon for our platform, questions about privacy, questions and challenges, or should you say opportunities around privacy, our approach to how we handle this in one holistic fashion, and then we're going to finish with a discussion of quality management. This is around the ICH and 21 CFR Part 820 and Part 11. So that's what we have for you. Again, if you have questions as we go, certainly interested in your thoughts and questions and concerns. So just as a reminder, let's look at some of the DNA Nexus GXP services. We're going to see this slide a few times during this presentation. Across the top, starting on the left, we start with the patient who gives a sample, either a liquid sample or a solid sample, to a study physician or a clinician who sends it off to the lab. And who sends it and does the sequencing. So that's where the chemistry or the biochemistry turns into data. That data is then uploaded to the DNA Nexus platform. The focal area where we're talking is that DNA Nexus GXP services box. But there are several points of interaction: the study physician that the patient interacted with, the sequencing lab who turned the wet sample into digital data with the sequences, the bioinformatician who designs which applications, how the pipeline will be used, what reports will come out and to whom. And then there are some connection points off to the right, which will depend upon how you're using it, such as metadata to a clinical trial system. It may go back to the central lab if it is a diagnostic device. There may be randomizations for, based on this particular sequence, we're going to put them in this particular arm for an adaptive trial. So the focus is going to be primarily that bottom central box called the DNA Nexus GXP services. So that gives you the context of what we're going to talk about in the next 30 or so minutes. So what has come up as we went through the new year? We were hit with some security issues. I'm sure most of you are aware of them in some manner or fashion. The meltdown inspector flaws in pretty much all modern CPU chips, except for possibly the one in the Apple Watch, but everything else is affected. And it's not just the chips, it also is the virtual memory system. So if you use VMs or Zens or cloud stuff, it impacts them as well, not just the underlying hardware. It impacts the operating systems that we all use. And so it was an interesting New Year's Day ugly awareness of, I have to stop what I'm doing and pay attention to this as to what is my exposure, is there been any exploits, how do we handle this? And this is just the common things that you have to worry about with security. And a lot of our users did reach out to DNA Nexus of were they, with DNA Nexus impacted? Certainly we use modern CPU chips and virtual systems. And our answer was yes, to our knowledge. We have no knowledge of exploits, but we've also spent quite a bit of time understanding how it impacted our customers. We were concerned about, as we put in the vendor's patches, what was the performance going on. So this is a particular area that our customers relied upon us, and we responded as we had new information as to what was the performance impact. That it wasn't the 30% that was in the news, it was less than 2 or 3%, depending upon which pipelines, et cetera. And we got very, very specific. So this was the case where, depending on the platform vendor, relieved a lot of people's stress. And I did have, as a security officer, a lot of conversations with their customers, understanding their concerns, and providing the quantitative information that we had at the time. But my point of this slide is this is an ongoing element of we always have impact on our security, and this is something that we pay a lot of attention to. Now let's go back to last summer and Equifax, the credit bureau breach. As we look at this, you're probably aware that yes, it did occur. It was last summer. Some of you may have been impacted or not really sure. And when it was reported in September, on the left side of the slide, this publicly listed company took a fairly significant hit in the 1-month profile, going from a share price of $140 a share down to about 95-ish points of a share. So they took a financial hit. Now, as of January 2018, let's get down some real numbers. It was about 146 million U.S. customers were hit with this exploit. But that wasn't just a U.S.-centric. There were 400,000 Brits and about 100,000 Canadians, and we're still counting. This is just the people impacted. We don't know the entire extent of the damage. Now, it's interesting. Let's look at the last fourth bullet down on the right side. Equifax was warned in March of 2017. They didn't do anything. They discovered the incident in July, the end of July, and then about a month and a half later, they reported it to the public. Very, very interesting, because we all know there are regulations. You have 72 hours, you have 24 hours, et cetera, to report a breach, depending upon which jurisdiction you sit. But look at what Equifax did. Okay, so what happened? Well, some of the Equifax executives did leave the company. They separated. They sold their stock. They generally did extremely well. To this date, there have been no fines, no jail terms, no 20 million euros, none of that stuff. There have been a call for more regulation, and bills were written. However, they have gone really nowhere. And there are some people's opinion that it's unlikely to have really any impact. If you read some of your U.S. state regulations, there are sanctions, there are fines in California, in New York, et cetera, et cetera. To my knowledge, none of them have happened. And that's an interesting approach to a security breach. That is most definitely not DNA Nexus approach to security. We take it much, much more seriously because this is your DNA. This is your research. This is the confidence your customers have that you are protecting their information. And we treat this as very, very special personal health information. So let's look at some of the items: the driver's license, Social Security or national ID number, the address, certainly your name, your birth date. I don't know about retinal scans. I wouldn't even know if it was stolen. And yes, the fingerprints, or if you use Apple devices or potentially Microsoft devices, a picture of your face. What if that's stolen? And now, much more important, what if your genome is stolen? That's an interesting thought. So we didn't have to go very far before I came to DNA Nexus. We were audited in the usual annual process by the HHS, and Chris Bolliger made the comment that if your credit card is hacked, you get protection services. However, if your healthcare is hacked and they find a particularly damaging diagnosis, there's no walking back. And I will up the ante a little bit, and that's saying if your genome data is stolen, you can't get a replacement. I can't get another credit card. I can't get another DNA genome. Now, will someone else make a clone of me from my data, perhaps in the movies? But this is very disturbing because once it's gone forever. You have no control over where it goes. And so the sensitivity of the DNA data is really high. And just because it's anonymized, if we go back to the early 90s, there was anonymized data of an HIV patient in Broward County in Florida. And the data store was indeed anonymized. However, in that particular month, it was the only HIV patient in Broward County in Florida. So was it really anonymized? No. And there have been stories, most recently from MIT, that taking DNA data that's supposedly anonymized, and by comparing that with Facebook and various other social media, they could determine with fairly high certainty whose DNA this belonged to. So that was multiple data points looking and taking anonymized DNA and saying, we can figure out who it is. So the security around this information is paramount. The sensitivity is very, very high. Much more, I'm willing to postulate, in the Equifax data. So on this, one of the elements, some of you may be aware of the GDPR coming on the 25th, is we take this very, very seriously. If you are taking any data that comes from citizens, natural citizens, not corporations, because corporations can be citizens by some people's ideas, but natural citizens, people with real DNA, and you take it, if that data comes from the EU or someone in the EU, then GDPR plays. The consequences are not that you'll get a raise, you may have to leave your job, is 20 million euros per incident or 4% of your gross revenue, whichever is largest. So there's some real teeth to this. DNA Nexus position is we will be GDPR compliant. We do have quite a few of our customers using EU data. We operate in the EU, and some of our customers have global data from global citizens anywhere. And so going with the most conservative approach as a data processor made a lot of sense to our company. DNA Nexus doesn't directly control or interact with the patient. Often our clinical labs do that. So we see ourselves as a data processor, but we also provide the documentation for our data controllers to show they are in compliance. So we are a partner with the data controllers, but our role is in a data processor. And in this slide, I ask some tough questions. Are your controls in place for the people? You've done the training, the business processes, and the technology, are they in place? And I'm willing to bet that you feel that by the 25th, you will be in place. But then the harder question is to know, are they working? Can you prove it? Can you, if an auditor were to come, can you prove that they are in place? And then the really tough question, can you quantify how effective are they? Certainly we can paper in controls, but how do I actually know whether they work? Do they work part of the time? Do they work all the time? And saying I haven't had a breach, a privacy breach yet, is not a great way of measuring how effective your controls are. So this is something that we have to answer to our management and to our customers. And DNA Nexus is getting that question to say, great that you have it in place, great that you're looking at getting certified, but what they really want to know is, how do I know what level of risk are you assuming? How do you know if the controls work? And that's a good question for you to always ask in your operation as well as your vendors. You should be asking us these questions as well, because they're good questions to ask. Now let's dive into a little bit of detail and let's look at your data. It's not just the data, the sequence data, the exome, the biomarker data, it is also the metadata, the data about the data. First question is, who owns the data? There are some of our customers say they own the data. Other customers say, no, the patient owns the data. But if you read the GDPR elements where the individual that provided the data may ask for it to be removed, I know the right to be forgotten is the common man, the layman's term for it. There's also the consent. It can be used for this particular purpose for this particular time. Is your metadata set so you can control exactly what gets done, when it gets removed. And remember, when you say removed, if you have a clinical trial where the data may be in the repository for 17 years after the clinical trial is closed, so that may be your retention period, does that match the GDPR, especially if the subject wants to be removed from that? Another question, and more operational, is when was the data last modified? Who was looking at? What were they doing? And this goes down to who did what and when did they do it, the team will come back to, so that we can prove without a shadow of doubt that the data is being managed appropriately. And this goes to our last major bullet, and that is around the data governance. So as you work through the processes for managing privacy, managing the provenance of the data, where did it come from? Where did it go? Who touched it? How was it manipulated? Can you prove it with a full trace matrix of what happened? Did it go to all the appropriate places? If you had a support call and they saw some of the data because it was a problem, what data did they see? Did it see generated data? Did it see real data? Was the support person sitting in the middle of Kazakhstan or India where the privacy regulations were not really clear? These are all of the things that we have to do, and it's stuff that DNA Nexus is doing on our platform as a data processor. And then there's the ongoing curation. So this sounds like a huge headache, and there's lots and lots of vendors out there to sell you whatever solution they may have, and that's not what we're here today. We're talking about how do we handle this as an approach. So I'm going to step back and look at all the things that we've talked about. Actually, we've talked only about security and compliance, but we're also going to talk about quality. And I want you to envision these three circles on a boardroom table, a large table. And let's imagine that you have some security regulations like ISO 27000, some perhaps some FTC, some FedRAMP, and throw those documents in that pile on the table, in the security pile. Then you have the compliance requirements, your local, city, state, federal, other countries where you do business, and you put that pile over in the compliance side. And now you may have some quality, ISO 9001, the various GXP, but 21 CFR Part 11, 820, 210, 211, ICH 8, 9, and 10, and you put them in a pile. And we have three large stacks. And the reason I do this is that often initiatives come out of companies to solve a particular compliance or security area as a standalone. There's a quality issue owned by the quality people, and they may go do their own thing, even though there may be an overlap with the security group. But they don't necessarily talk to each other because they're different groups. But these multiple drivers, if you look at it, and you start to look at them, and this is why they're circles and not conference room tables, is if you put them in a Venn diagram, there's an awful lot of overlap. So when you think about the security and the compliance and quality, there's some common themes, such as who did what, what were they allowed to do? From as simple as a document approval on an electronic record, who could do the authoring, who could do the editing, who revised it, who approved it, really simple stuff. Actually covers some quality regulations, some security regulations with slightly different language, as well as compliance. Who touched it? Where did the data come from? What was the data provenance? So if we look at that center of the three circles in that Venn diagram, there are a significant amount of common themes. Now, of course, there are some contradictions. Of course there are, where by complying with this regulation, you violate that regulation. And that's why it's not as clear and as simple as set up by Venn diagrams with very distinct lines of are you complying or are you not? Because when you put 40 or 50 regulations, compliances, and your interpretations of those regulations, it makes it very complicated. But we have found over the last 15 or so years that this holistic approach makes a whole lot of sense. The traceability matrix that the quality people need for a validated system is a bit of overkill for the security people, as well as the GDPR people, but they're not going to complain because it shows an awful lot of if you are to make a change, are you still compliant with this particular regulation? Have you diluted your security posture because you made this particular change control? Well, the trace matrix is a fantastic vehicle to do that. And so that's this is the approach that DNA Nexus uses, and you're going to see why we use it, and we use it in an ongoing fashion to handle the regulation. So as a new regulation comes or will be coming, we look at this and we look and say, well, what's the overlap with the existing regulations? And they tend to be about an 80 to 90% overlap in either security and quality or compliance and quality or security and compliance or all three. It's that the other 10, 15, 20%, there tend to be reports to a particular Japanese agency or to a French agency, which I would never send in English to a French agency. So those are the one-offs. And it's much more manageable. So as we are hit with additional regulations or concerns, it's fairly straightforward how to measure the impact. What needs to change? Not a whole lot, or maybe just some reporting relationships. So this approach works particularly well. And for our customers who look and say, oh, it's another regulation, what do I have to stop doing? We don't take that approach. We want to keep our people productive, our customers and your customers productive by establishing guardrails. What can we do where you're far away from the guardrails? Life is very good if you are allowed to be flexible, say you're a researcher. These areas keep you well within the privacy guardrails, well within the security. You know the provenance of the data, so if you screw it up, we have lots of things. If this was the original, you don't have to say which version is which. We know it extremely well because we have to, more so than the researcher does, but we need to know that. And so having an area of guardrails provides that sense of security and confidence for our research customers to get reproducible results, same answers every time. They know where the data came from. If they collaborate, they know what their gold standards are, and everything's on a level playing field. So this approach has worked particularly well for us. I did mention risk. It's not black and white, and I think this diagram I'll walk you through is one that a good number of you are very familiar to. Every organization, I would say that even on this call, some organizations are extremely conservative and others are less so. And that is a posture that's set by the board of each of your companies or your directors. And they draw that blue line of all the potential risks that are out there. And this particularly on the x-axis, on the frequency of occurrence, and on the y-axis, severity, and start to drop in what are the potential elements of risk, which is a high impact risk. And these aren't hard to imagine in terms of security breach, data gets lost. We talked about that. How about data is not removed, but just vanishes from the system, et cetera, et cetera. And what are your strategies for mitigating them? People have come to DNA Nexus and saying, I know you're a platform data processor. How do you do it? And do you have other customers that are in this space? How do they do it? And those are conversations while leaving out customer-specific information of taking the community into an area that which side of the blue line do you need to be on? You'll see these red and blue arrows. How far does your company need to move? Because for some companies, it may be sufficient to just cover by the blue line. Others need to be well down in that lower left-hand corner. And so understanding the risk, managing, controlling and managing that risk in an ongoing fashion is something that comes with the GXP part of the DNA Nexus platform, which everyone has. It's a matter of whether they want to turn it on or not. So now we're going to talk about the quality side, which has got a lot of overlap with the compliance and security. Going back to the slide we showed early on, here is the DNA Nexus GXP services in the bottom side. We have multiple people interacting, but I want to focus specifically on the GXP service, the lower box. And so some of the things that we do in that box is provide support for clinical trials that use next generation sequencing. So if it doesn't use DNA, but it uses next generation sequencing, now this could be biomarkers, it could be panels, it could be exomes. Some of our customers say, can we bring our proteomics with us? Absolutely. And so where they're looking and where they're using this is to optimize and de-risk clinical trials, who's likely to be a high responder to this particular chemical agent or biological agent. They may know the PKs from the pre-clin days, and they may realize this patient is going to have a lot of adverse events. So can we de-risk in that particular area? Or the breakdown of the product is going to be slow, so that means that they either have a high dose or maybe the breakdown metabolite is the drug. So they can know that by looking at the sequence. Now you could say, I just want to look at certain biomarkers, but many of our customers said we'd rather get more and then retrospectively look back. Because if you didn't collect it and you didn't get it, you can't go backwards. So more and more of our customers are grabbing larger sequences, picking some initial data markers in phase 1 and phase 2 trials, but many of them have expanded because they have the whole sequence in that, so use it. In phase 3, they're using more and more of the panels and exomes. So we are hearing from our customers that they're using to optimizing the dose and frequency, and in a later webinar, we'll go into much more detail. Another category is around diagnostic devices. So there are several DNA sequences that if this patient or pediatric patient, there seems to be a large cluster of them, has this particular sequence, this is the appropriate therapy or this is the appropriate dose. So DNA Nexus supports the submission of 510K and PMA submissions to the FDA and the various other agencies as the software component. So we provide that particular material as part of your insert package. Not all of it is all on DNA Nexus. Some of it is a partnership in terms of the risk profile. We're often asked for our thoughts on how they manage the risk, and that's some of the things we've already talked about. Once it gets approved, the DNA Nexus platform is part of the ongoing production analysis. So we remember back in the previous slide, the sequencing lab may be getting production samples 20, 30 a day. They go to the GXP services and then back to the sequencing lab where it gets interpreted or a report comes back. So this may be part of production. And so we have several customers that are doing this for clinical diagnostics. And then we have a few customers that are using it for GXP for manufacturing. And this is where NGS is used in the manufacturing process. So if the drug or the pharmaceutical active ingredient is bacteria in your gut that causes you to feel less depressed or something like that, some level of efficacy, our platform is used to actually look and say, what kind of bacteria are there? Are all the good bugs there and none of the bad bugs? Can we quantify the bad bugs? We also have a segment of our customers that are using it for biological synthesis. So instead of the wet labs and making tanker car loads of the drugs, they're making it with various yeast and microbial surfaces. And they have learned that by looking at the next-gen sequencing, the NGS, perhaps the full genome, they learn a lot more about what's brewing and the purity and potential contaminants in their biological system as they make more of those. So these are three general use cases we flew through, and my colleague in February will talk about this in much more detail. So let's look at the platform in a little more detail. There is the cloud service providers, Microsoft, who's co-sponsoring this webinar, and there's the platform. So this is the base DNA Nexus platform running on the cloud service provider. Everyone gets it. It's a validated environment, so it's 21 CFR Part 11 compliant and compliant with many of the other pharmaceutical and medical device regulations. And there's all the usual stuff of being able to collaborate on particular parts of the data. And this goes to our privacy, is who sees what and when do they see it. The data services, various computational services, because if used in a clinical sense, the sample may be sequenced at 8 a.m. and the therapy needs to be delivered at 3 p.m. So there's a time limit on this as to what the exact therapy may be. And so the computation, they may want to use our GPU services instead of the standard production services. So that's the blue in the cloud service providers. And then there's the application layer. And this is where most of our customers will say, this is where my pipeline lives. That is indeed true, but it also incorporates the platform. So that's where the secondary analysis, the transformational informatics, the various community and sharing occur. And this is the layer that most of our customers interact. And the reason that I've separated this is an entirely validated system because it's GXP. And the platform validates at a different speed and different release cycle frequency than the application layer. And this is where it gets very interesting. So some of our challenges is we upgrade our platform every week. And I want you to think about how many of you have GXP systems that update every week. Most of our QA people, their jaw's on the floor. If they can upgrade maybe once or twice a year, that's quite the challenge for 9 or 10,000 requirements. That is a challenge. There's also another challenge, which is a little bit more insidious, and that is the tendency of our scientists to use obsolete applications. Obsolete from both a scientific perspective, and I have a citation down there that TopHat is one of them, but looking across all of the 2 to 3 year old applications which are no longer, they're deprecated, they're not really supposed to be used. In 2015, a researcher found in almost 4,000 papers that 2/3 of those papers used obsolete applications. In other words, if they had upgraded to recent applications, their quality and accuracy and reproducibility would have been better. I'm not saying that the paper's results would have been different. I'm not going that far. But there are some real challenges. Hey, it's in the pipeline. It's always been in the pipeline. I'll leave it there for 3 or 4 years. Are you getting the best out of your work? That's a really good question. So that's the challenges, but you could also see this as an opportunity. The opportunity, so it's a multi-tenant platform. So we have customers that don't want to have multiple copies, and I think the HHS has talked about they really don't want to have multiple copies of the same sequence all over the place. They would prefer and will pay for one copy that is carefully shared with the appropriate people for the appropriate reasons. And remember my comments about the consent and the data provenance for GDPR data. We take this seriously. So having a multi-tenant platform provides for a fantastic use of collaboration, of, say, for a clinical trial, 2 commercial companies and several universities of collaborating across sites, of something that can work. Some of those collaborators are competitors, so they want to use the same genomic pool, but they don't want to see each other's results because they are competitors. So this is a very interesting opportunity that several of our customers are now using. Collaborating across different clinical sites, some of our customers have moved the site with their CROs, have moved the site over to the DNA Nexus platform as because they're using either multiple CROs or one CRO says just DNA Nexus, please manage it for multiple pharma customers. The challenge that I left up there, and now I'm going to answer, is what about that weekly update? Obviously, we are completely automated. So we have gone from the old days of a paper computer system validation and results to a fully automated. So DNA Nexus has upwards of 85 or 9,000 test scripts that we run several times in the staging environment per week, and then we release. And this is something we've been doing for several years, and the validation is completely automated. And that's really the only way we could keep that release schedule. So these are some of the challenges. Some we advise our customers, such as obsolete components. Some are on us in terms of how do we keep it validated, keep it under control, manage the risk as the regulations evolve, as the risk tolerance changes. Anyway, so with that said, we're coming to the end of our webinar, and what I'd like to do is move to my last slide, which is an advertisement, and now take some questions. Carolyn, do you want to open, do you want to read off some of the questions that we've had so far?
Sure, and for anyone who still has questions, please click the Q&A icon down at the bottom of your screen, and you can type in your question. So one that just came in is, what would you view to be the biggest challenge in security and compliance?
I would say the biggest challenge tends to be user error, in that they want to do things because they're brilliant scientists and brilliant customers that will get them in trouble. So it's not so much the things that the news media, the meltdown inspector, certainly gets a lot of attention and concern. It's not necessarily the 20 million euros that concerns us, so that it's clearly on our mind. It's helping guide our customers who want to do the right thing, but don't have the expertise in GXP, they don't have the expertise in compliance, and when they go to their own people, they see them as roadblocks. Working with us, say, well, how do other people do this? And oh, by the way, you also mitigate various other risks. So they can focus on the science or the approvals. So it's more around what I'll call the driver error is the area of challenge.
Do you have any specific suggestions for how to mitigate the risk?
Well, one of them is very straightforward, is has anyone else ever done this before? And some people just don't ask for help. Others are happy to copy examples and modify them. That tends to be an area that when we start to share some of the stories, and we will be doing this at the user group meetings and in various releases, is how have people worked through to get to their scientific end most efficiently and move around some of the challenges, stay within the guardrails. Now, sometimes it comes up is, why does DNA Nexus do it this way? Why do they not let me do something? And when they understand why the guardrail is there, then they may say, well, that's nice, but how should I do it? They may not ask that question explicitly, but when we share how other customers have done it, then they start to understand, oh, by the way, this addresses various compliance elements. They never ask us, is this compliant with this particular regulations? Because they usually don't know about the regulation, unless, of course, it's my fellow CISO or the privacy officer, but often our conversations were with the scientist. So that's a question that you should ask, and also follow examples. Now, if you have brilliant thinking that may break some rules, please talk to us. We'd like to help you have your brilliance and stay within the guardrails.
Thank you. A next question is, does DNA Nexus assist in putting together a response plan during audits?
Absolutely. So we work with the auditors. Now, this is both the planned audit. This goes all the way from the supplier audit to your supplier audit to the FDA sending in a 482 or your internal audits, et cetera. We work with you. We can share some stories. We do provide components for part of the package. We do sit down with our customers, say with a clinical device company, and say, you do this, we do that, set up a bit of a RACI. And if they are not familiar, because NGS is kind of new to them, that's what we do. And we're happy to share the experience. Now, we also learn from our customers of what has worked and what has been a bit of a challenge. It may not be wrong. It may just be very difficult to get through a conservative organization. And so that's some of the value that we bring to the plate, and we do share. It is not just us helping everyone. There is a community, and we want you to be successful.
Great, thank you. Another question is, can a client choose to add a specific application only for their use and then also benefit from the testing paradigm?
Absolutely. So a lot of the customers will come and they're not ready to collaborate. They have a particular one, or maybe it's proprietary. We do have commercial software that is used on our platform, and they develop it on it. And so that is locked down in your org, in your program. And you may say, well, how do I know it's, and let's pretend it's going to be GXP in the future. Can you have DNA Nexus run this set of tests in this particular, using this particular data in your automated test bundle? And the answer is absolutely. We actually like that. Not to say all of the 9,000 or so tests are unique. Some may be, say, test 9,040 to 45 may actually come from a particular customer. But because that customer is testing it, the community benefits. And they may be redundant, that's fine. So it takes a few extra milliseconds to run another 5 or 6 tests. We like to do that.
All right, just a few more questions. If anyone has more, please type in your question now. What are the significant changes that will happen in the regulatory landscapes in the future, and how will they shape how organizations can collaborate or share data?
So in terms of the sharing data, let's answer the back end part. There are 2 factors. There's one of saying the agencies that do the funding don't want to have to pay for the same thing multiple times. They would rather prefer to pay for it once and focus on the science of how the data gets reused. So that's the DNA Commons and various other international areas want to have that one repository. The counter to that is there's a lot of concern over where does this data come from, what's the quality of the data, in terms of what was the quality of the analysis. Taking data that was sequenced 5 or 6 years ago, it's not the same quality as data sequenced on the latest and greatest scanners, different resolutions, different quality, and maybe it was just a poor job. There's also things around privacy that we mentioned. Chinese data does not leave China. Okay, not a problem. Same thing with the EU, same thing with Australia. So knowing where this data is, knowing who it's accessible to in a simple manner. I don't want to have to get a new module to import some data from Australia. I want it to come through a common interface and respect the commercial agreements as well as the government regulatory requirements, and do that with a clear conscience so that the scientists can do their work. The submission can be given knowing it's on a GXP, it's not going to get kicked back. So there is the pros and the cons of want more control. The idea of knowing, is your data controlled? to what level, how effective are those controls, so I can focus on my science or my submission or my whatever it happens to be. That's the trend, and not worry about all the things that if I were to do it on my own, I would have to manage this and have an ongoing testing service, et cetera. They don't want to do that. And yes, the regulations will continue. In terms of the privacy, unclear in the United States in this political arena, but the EU has said very clearly, as of the 25th, the teeth are out there. They're incentivized to go collect their fee. And for the rest of the world, in my personal opinion, Japan, China, Australia, the other countries have aligned with the EU in terms of privacy and will very likely continue to align. So we're following the EU's on privacy, ICH, et cetera, as we are fairly conservative, so our customers are secure and are securely managed.
Great, thank you, Lauren. And another question is, how is DNA Nexus prepared for audits focusing on GDPR by European/national authorities?
So in terms of audits, I tell my colleagues as I came in that you should prepare to be audited on a weekly or almost daily basis, and I think they were shocked. This is for this type of organization, as we get more and more customers, this happens all the time. And so how we survive this is not as a one-off. Just like those Venn diagrams where there's a firefighting of saying, oh my God, it's a new regulation, we don't do the same thing for the audit. We know what the auditors usually like to see. Now, sometimes they'll see a security auditor will see a quality document. There's some nomenclature we have to explain, but we have a package of how do we handle this. I bring up, as I alluded, the trace matrix and point it not necessarily to requirements to test scripts, but the provenance of the data. And while that may be useful in one particular area for security, say for a FedRAMP review from a GDPR, they'll be looking at the same business processes against the GDPR. So there are some things as a data processor, we don't have to do a privacy impact assessment. We've already done it on all of our data and our metadata because we know that our controllers are going to need it. And while we don't have to provide it, it makes it a whole lot easier to work with us and get a common understanding of who's got what. Now, the data controller still ultimately is part of the audit, but we're actually right there in the room. We can be there in the room with you as you go through the audit, because getting it from the source has a lot more confidence to the auditor. They're talking not through someone, not by proxy, but with the people that do it every day. So we're with you to help you be successful.
Great, thank you. And if anyone has any last minute questions, please submit them now. In the meantime, our next webinar in this series will be held February 28th at 10 a.m. PST. This will be focused on incorporating genomics to improve safety and efficacy and to reduce the time and cost of clinical trials. We'll share out this slide, but if you would like to register, please, you can type in the URL, which you see here. And we will also be in the Microsoft booth 3832 at the HIMSS conference in early March in Las Vegas. And it looks like we don't have any further questions. We appreciate you attending today, and we'll be sending out the slides later this week.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.